activate nefarious forces within that society. This is how British people and Americans think. They're like, well, I invest $10 million to get this outcome. It's not what they do.
In this clip with Konstantin Kisin from the Diary of a CEO podcast, Konstantin explains how Russian influences in Western democracies actually work. Konstantin is a British immigrant who moved there from Russia, so he knows what he's talking about. And it's actually quite informative if you're interested in learning how Russia tries to manipulate the West. Watch here.
There's a guy called Yuri Bezmenov. If you're not familiar with him, this guy's going to blow your mind. You should look him up. He was a Soviet defector in the 80s who came from the Soviet Union to India to Canada, ended up in America. He gave a series of lectures, which people can watch on YouTube, about what the Soviet intelligence services were actually focusing on. Because during the Cold War, you might not remember this, but people thought about Soviet spies as like stealing microfilms of American nuclear installations and all of this stuff. Actually, what he said was almost all of their resources were used on what he called demoralization. And demoralization is the process whereby you divide society and you activate nefarious forces within that society against the society. So you encourage forces that are destabilizing. This is one thing that people don't understand about Russian misinformation, disinformation, influence operations, etc. They're not designed to get a specific person elected. This is how British people and Americans think. They're like, well, I invest $10 million to get this outcome. It's not what they do. What they want is to create a cacophony of lies so that you don't know what to believe anymore. Is this true? Is that true? And so they are and were and have always been paying people in the West or using people in the West to sow discord, to divide people against each other, to say, the Soviet Union, by the way, was very active in funding militant African-American groups in the 60s and 70s and 80s in America. And in fact, whenever people would say to the Soviets, well, look, you're like starving millions of people and putting them in gulags, they would say, well, what about black people in America? You don't treat them well, right? So who are you to tell us about all of this stuff? So, by the way, this isn't like a unique thing. Like America does this too. America funds liberal organizations in Russia to get Russian liberals to act in their interest. This is what all civilizations do. I'm just saying maybe we should protect our civilization from this foreign influence.
Konstantin continues and now explains how the Russians in practice try to sow this discord throughout the West.
So yes, foreign forces are at play, but you can't I don't know, I imagine there's no amount of money that people could give you to spread Russian propaganda on this show. There's no amount of money that people could give me to spread Russian propaganda or Chinese propaganda on my show. What they do is they find people who already agree with them. And then they amplify their voice using money and influence and say, look, we'll give you, we'll give you $10 million and you can come to this great conference. We'll give you an opportunity to interview this guy who's close to Vladimir Putin or this guy who says this or that person or this person. And they just take the forces within our society that are already destabilizing and they amplify them.
Steven Bartlett, the host of the Diary of a CEO podcast, now asks Konstantin what the Russian influence on right-wing voices in the West was about. This was a topic a couple months back where it was revealed that a Russian company had paid a lot of money to an American network of a lot of different shows, podcasts, etc. This was heavily reported as some center-right or right-wing voices being exposed as Russian puppets. Konstantin explains what went on.
So this podcaster in the United States, it was Tenant Media. Is
Yes.
that one podcast or is that a network of podcasts?
So what happened is they had a network of podcasters underneath them who, according to the indictment, they were all being used. So they didn't know they were being paid by Russia.
Okay.
They were just all being used. And every now and again, we don't know the full details, but it would be like, hey, have you seen this news story? Like the Ukrainians might have been involved in the terrorist attack in Russia. Maybe you should cover it. And one of them did. Stuff like that.
Okay. And they weren't necessarily picking a side, were they?
No, they were picking a side.
Oh, so they were pro-Trump or pro-Kamala or?
Well, they were mostly right-wing influencers. But the person in question, whose name is Lauren Chen, she actually started agitating people against Donald Trump at one point, which is my point. They are not trying to get a particular person elected. They're trying to make you go, well, who do I vote for? What's going to, like, just to confuse everybody to the point that they don't know what to believe and they don't know what to think and they don't know what to do.
Looks like it's working.
That's my point, which is why we need in the West to have a very clear idea of who we are, where we're going, how we got here, what makes our society successful, where we've come from, and to reject the lies about our history, because this is why both the crazy left and the crazy right want to revise our history so that we don't know who we are anymore, so that we can't say, well, actually, Britain is a great country and has done incredible things for the world, right? Britain is the country that has the first modern parliament. It's the country that spread democracy around. It's the country that actually, the first empire in history that ended slavery. It ended slavery. It didn't invent it. It ended it. Slavery was the norm. And then the British came along, practiced slavery just like everybody else, and a terrible thing it was. And then they spent a tremendous amount of blood, money, and treasure to end slavery, not only within the British Empire. They spent a huge amount of diplomatic, military, and financial capital to force other countries to end slavery in those countries as well, right? But that's not what you're being taught in school right now, is it?
No.
And that's the problem, because if you think of your society as based on these terrible things, well, why would you want its values to persevere and continue in the future?